During my surgery today, a call came through from a father who'd been asked to pick his child up from school. His son was 5 years old and had started with some white spots inside his mouth and a rash, and the school were worried that he might have measles. I wasn't sure what to do about this, so I had Mapper Medicine switched on and I typed in measles. I clicked the search button and here was measles. I clicked on measles. And as I was talking to the father, listening to the story, I decided to go on clinical assessment and started to ask him questions. And this is literally what I was doing. So I asked about whether the child had been poorly, and the father said no, he'd been quite well. It was only today that he'd started. I asked about these white spots that he had, and he'd mentioned that the spots were on his tongue, but they were also in his mouth. And I decided to have a quick look at Google whilst I was listening to him, and clicked on this, and here's a picture that came through, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, and then continued to ask him further questions about whether he'd had a cough, abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea. Asked about whether he'd been an unwell child, whether he was fully up to date with his vaccinations, whether he'd been travelling to areas where there might be measles, whether it was or any other sort of things that would make me think that he might be at high risk of getting measles himself. Having looked at this and felt comfortable that it was unlikely to be measles, asked about his rash and whether it had started anywhere particularly, or whether it was everywhere, asked whether it was spreading, and how long he'd had it for. It didn't sound as though it was measles, but clearly it wasn't something I'd be able to diagnose over the telephone. So I therefore asked him to come in. He came in later that afternoon. Again, I went over the quick information here, had a look inside his mouth to confirm that actually he didn't have any white spots either in his tongue or around his mouth, didn't have conjunctivitis, and didn't have any of these symptoms. I examined him clinically and was quite happy therefore to exclude measles, give him general advice for a non-specific viral infection, and was able to discharge him.